indicates she really did recall hearing the steady roar of artillery fire and watching thousands of troops pass from both armies passing in front of her home during those pivotal days in the American Civil War. This was in 1863. The Civil War feels like ancient history now, and it still surprises me that I looked into the eyes of a woman who had watched one piece of it as it had occurred. Now, I was young, she was old, and through her, I feel a direct connection to events that happened almost 160 years ago, a span of almost 2 full lifetimes. This same time span separates African Americans from enslavement in the United States, and most Native Americans from pre-conquest indigenous life. We are 2 long lifetimes separate from all of these long ago situations. Very few people alive today have ever engaged with forebears who experienced these things. Now, a century is between 3 to 5 generations, so a memory bridge crossing 100 years usually requires a family relationship of a great-grandparent at least. My mom was a grandmother and a great-grandmother. As I said, she was born on May 7th, 1923 in Washington, D.C. Assuming her longest memories probably formed in earnest around the ages of 5 or 6, this would put her at 1929, or the time of the great stock market crash and the beginning of the Depression that followed. She was fortunate that her father had a career as a civil servant, and they never felt the sting of poverty, but her awareness and personal sensitivities developed during an era of scarcity, and they framed her view of life. The Depression ended with our entry to World War II, which brought its own misery. Her brother and her boyfriend, eventually Dad, were both deployed overseas in wartime. While on the home front, the war effort brought enduring shortages and rationing of commodities. By the time she became an adult, all of Mom's life experience had been lived in times of scarcity, which she simply accepted as the way things are. She and many of her peers internalized thrift and austerity as a way of life, something that was a necessary part of responsible living for them. Unlike many of her peers, she never unlearned thrift and austerity. It drove me nuts as I became a teenager during a time typified by big-time consumerism. And I would want the same best new things that my friends all had, only hear her to recite one of her many mantras, things like, "As long as you are neat and clean, Alan, all clothes are perfectly acceptable." Or, "If you really want something, save your money." These weren't what I wanted to hear. But for entirely new reasons now, we are starting to honor this less is more mentality and the idea of living in a manner that leaves a smaller footprint on the earth is gaining traction and importance. I don't think I'm big enough to agree that Mom was right all along, but the fortitude and perseverance of persons from her generation can give us a model, showing that life can be good without owning 2 of everything that Amazon and Walmart have to offer. For thousands of American men of my mother's era, along with some women, World War II itself and the military service was a deeply formative experience, especially for those deployed in combat. They're often called the greatest generation because they experienced both the Depression and the war, and because of the attributes we give them of bravery, duty, patriotism. This generation is disappearing rapidly. They're mostly gone, and very few World War II veterans are still alive. One of these, though, is my father-in-law. He enlisted in the Army Air Force during college and served as a fighter pilot in the European theater. Pictures of him show a rugged, handsome, very young man, just 20 years old, standing under the wing of his airplane. He flew Mustangs, escorting bomber squadrons into Germany. Long, cold, terror-filled hours alone in a cockpit. Casualties were steep. Only about half of his fellow pilots made it home. From what I understand, though, after the war, he scarcely mentioned it or his experiences in the war during his entire adulthood and professional career. He fended off any questions with very vague dismissals like, damned if I know. But then in 1995, things changed. Someone organized a 50th reunion of survivors from his fighter group at their old airfield in Southeast England. He attended, reattached with men whom he had shared this history, and suddenly he became consumed by his wartime experience. Since then, flying, warplanes, and World War II have become his obsession. He even helped produce a film about his unit's history. I hardly ever hear him talk now about raising a family or having a professional career. Everything is World War II. I find it telling that he needed to repress his war experiences so deeply while he went through this process of raising a family and working through his career. For whatever reasons, and I will never know them, his wartime history was not allowable as a part of that life, at least outside of his head. We thought he had buried it, but then 50 years later, the emotional floodgates opened, and suddenly sharing his insights and memories from that time became the most real part of his life. We need these stories, just as we need to learn from Holocaust survivors, the survivors of the nuclear bombs we dropped in Japan, and other groups who experienced profound trauma and stress during that time in our history. It is this human experience that relates so deeply why we need to say, never again. And while these people are disappearing, hopefully we've retained enough of their histories and enough of their stories and narrations to remember. And hopefully we continue to do it with all events and experiences we've had since. Besides World War II, which all of us here are too young to recall in any detail, there have been other watershed times in our life experiences. For each generation, for each person, these are different. My own life was deeply affected by the Vietnam War. It was the situation that forced me to confront and develop ideas about citizenship, patriotism, nationalism, and ethical behavior. I had a lot to resolve. I had to find my own moral compass, and I definitely had to grow beyond my early training and education. Some events just redefine our lives. Some redefine the collective consciousness as well. For people who were living at the time, everyone knows where they were on December 7th, 1941, or November 22nd, 1963, or July 20th, 1969. I'll help you here. That was the moon landing. Or September 11th, 2001. These are each times where we shared a profound experience, witnessing events that transformed our understanding of our world and of how it works. We either lost innocence or gained wisdom. And every generation knows these events differently. The cohorts of youth entering college in the last few years were not even born at the time of the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. Events that feel to me like they occurred just yesterday. History books will always report what happened that day, except maybe not so well in Texas or Florida. But for younger Americans, 9/11 threatens to become just another fact, a bit of book learning. The direct and visceral feeling of pain, the loss of innocence, the moral outrage at being attacked here in New York City. All of the feelings we shared after 9/11 can only be told as stories. And we who experienced that time must tell the stories. Narrative and imagery is how history comes alive. Our world changes so quickly. With the new technologies, the pace of change accelerates constantly. Public use of the internet is only just over 25 years old, but it has reshaped almost every aspect of how we communicate and how we live. When I was a kid, we shared a party line on our home telephone, always having to check if it was free when we wanted to make a call. Today, I have a supercomputer in my pocket that, among other things, makes phone calls. And with the emergence of effective artificial intelligence technology, things will just keep changing and changing and changing. But as mind-bending as technological changes might be, and in spite of how deeply they pervade our lives, I am quite sure that they cannot really alter what is essential in each of our lives. Everyone alive has had to experience adaptation to change. For as long as people have pursued, quote, progress, this has been a truth. And just as my kids and grandkids can be impatient with my clumsy use of apps on the phone, or the fact that my thumbs don't know how to type, I am confident that their kids and grandkids will have a similar opportunity to humiliate them and their elders in turn. It's the way of everything. But as we look back into our lifetimes, and as they will look back into theirs, we should be able to highlight patterns of response of when we were coping with the unknown, examples of adaptation to new ideas, and resilience in the face of change. We should be able to learn from our own stories how we came to terms with whatever life is put in front of us, be it tragedy, technology, or pleasure. And it's not the details of these stories, but the continuing ability that we keep finding in ourselves to adapt, adjust, grow, to accept the unknown. I may gripe about change, but living with change is an essential life skill in our world, a skill that all must learn. And while change is driven by technology, our response remains and shall always be human. I'm sure that we're not that different from the people of my mother's generation or of any generation. We've learned new things and our prevailing norms and attitudes evolve, and we hold different expectations for what our lives will bring. But all of these things are about the content of our life. Our essence must be very much the same. We want to thrive. We want to be stimulated, to love and be loved, to be safe, to feel like we belong, to be able to find and hold meaning. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, to share, laugh, and even cry. We need to care. These are the human sides of our life, regardless of our technical setting. In the old days, people traveled by foot or horse, went to church to save their souls, wrote letters or knocked on doors to connect with friends, and worked long hours to feed their families, spending most of their free time doing domestic tasks with their family to keep the household ticking. The local community was where everything occurred. Life had a rhythm, and if all was good, a sense of purpose. Today, a little different. We commute by car or work from home, find information and connect to others using the internet, and have devices that we use interchangeably for communication, entertainment, and tasking. We associate with persons of similar interests from anywhere in the world and often communicate asynchronously. Those of us who seek spiritual fulfillment tend to follow our own path and are as likely to consult music, art, or nature as they are a church. Life has a rhythm, and if all is good, a sense of purpose. In the old times, in the new times, and into the future, what we all need is to learn to be human and how to thrive in our own humanity. We will always face challenges, and the present threats of climate change and nuclear war are all too real. Major adaptation of how we engage with our planet and with each other are compelling items on our menu of action issues. In order to engage effectively, to make the needed changes, we must find ways to bring everyone back to their fundamental humanity, to promote the idea of common good. We must teach ourselves about the value of every lifetime, about the power we gain by sharing. Our true superpower is imagination, where we can blend our memory, the memories of others, and our understanding of what should matter, and turn it into a new vision for a world that would allow all to flourish. So our task is to begin the work that leads to healing and understanding, so that 100 years from now, an elder can look back and explain how human arrogance had almost destroyed us, but that we had confronted our shortcomings and managed to redirect our passions to things that truly matter. That we have finally learned that inner peace is a bigger reward than power, that shared comfort and abundance render personal accumulation unnecessary. So shall it be. Now, if you could rise, if you would like, to sing hymn number 1029.